This is Distant Replay, the podcast that goes back in time to relive all the greatest events that we witnessed in sports. From upsets, to championships, to cultural moments, we discuss it all. Coming up on today's episode.
I think I now would tell myself, my 19-year-old self, not to stay so quiet, to be a little bit more brave, to be a little bit more courageous, to say yes and no, to make sure that I have an attorney that cares for me, that's looking out for my best interest. I was trusting people with my life that, I had no idea that was working against me.
Well, we've reached the finale of Outcry. If you haven't watched it yet, stop now, go back, watch the series, listen to our episodes, recapping every single episode of the Docuseries, because right now, we gotta announce, and you've watched it, probably. Greg's innocent, Mike, and you were right, but I was pumped to finally, I celebrated a little bit, man. Gave my wife a high five. It felt good to see him get justice.
Fully exonerated, right? So he on the website, he's checking that website every Wednesday. And on November 6, 2019, there's a very short little line in that announcement that says relief granted. And those are the words he's been waiting to hear for almost 2 years at that point. Remember, the Court of Criminal Appeals was given Greg's case on December 20th, 2017. And he doesn't get that ruling of relief granted until November 6, 2019. And it's surreal how he finds out. I mean, he's literally sitting in his apartment in New York City, refreshing a computer screen that's projected onto a flat screen TV. Just surreal to have it happen like that. And no one else around him, just him alone finding it out. It was a pretty cool moment.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome. Just him and the cameraman too. And it's pretty crazy. I can't imagine whoever, the documentary producers here, did they ever think they were going to have to invest that much time to get a result, to get an outcome in this case? Because like you mentioned, almost 2 years, pretty crazy that he lived like that, just the uncertainty for 2 years, and could finally put it behind him not that long ago. I mean, honestly, which was crazy when you think back to this whole process, Mike, and it's like, this started in 2013. And then the fact that we've almost come all the way into the present moment is pretty wild. You don't really get that with the documentary like this very often. So pretty unique there. But we're going to dive into all of episode 5 tonight. Plus, we're going to give a lot of our thoughts on this documentary, whatever questions we have, some of the other stuff that we've kind of found in reading and kind of digging in. I didn't go down a complete rabbit hole. I don't know about you, Mike, but at least dug into some other additional information that wasn't provided on the documentary to get a better feel for the case. And we'll put a little a bow on this series for Outcry on Showtime. So follow us online, distantreplaypodcast.com. You'll find a recap of every single show we have. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever it is you listen. Find us on Twitter and Instagram as well, plus on YouTube, Distant Replay Podcast. So let's jump into it, Mike. This episode, we're going to kind of run through the things that we learned in this episode outside of the innocents, but to start with the victim of Johnathan McCarty, one of the victims that we know about, Harley Schneider. And I thought this was pretty powerful to have her voice on here, to have her give her perspective, what happened with her and Johnathan. And, it kind of gives us this big picture look at what happened because the ball was dropped in this case in the beginning and allowed Johnathan McCarty, who potentially could have been the person that was that committed these offenses to the boy the first time around, to let him go free. And in the meantime, he's able to kind of do what he's been doing, including this rape of this girl who was, when she was 15, not quite even 16 years old.
Yeah, so a lot of this documentary, the focus has been on Greg. It's been on the investigation, and you kind of lose some perspective sometimes when you're caught up in did he do it, did he not, in the ramifications of the police department, of the DA, sort of not holding up their end of the bargain and asking the first question, did a crime occur, and then who committed that crime? And unfortunately, Harley Schneider is a victim because they didn't do their jobs correctly. And I give her a lot of credit for having the courage to talk on this documentary. I thought she was extremely well-spoken, extremely well thought out, and she came off, very well in this. And she went into how she was raped by Johnathan a month or two after Greg's conviction, and how over the course of time, her emotions changed throughout, she obviously went through a sea of emotions. I can't even imagine. I don't even want to think about that ever happening to someone that I care about. And she ends up being just very angry about all the mistakes that were made and if they weren't, it could have prevented this horrible thing from happening to her.
Yeah, it was tough to listen to, but I agree that I'll give her credit for having the courage to speak up, because she just said she wanted to make people aware that this doesn't happen again. Know who this person truly is. Make it a point to point it out, because when he goes to this case, Mike, and we get to kind of look into Sean Dick prosecuting this rape charge, he essentially gets off, I mean, not scot-free, but when you compare it to what Greg's gone through, it seems like a drop in the bucket. I mean, isn't he out on bond even before Greg has his final Court of Appeal result? Like he's gone through it, and then he's already out before that happens.
He got out of prison, they showed, in February of 2020. So just a couple months after Greg was exonerated. And you're right. I mean, he gets 4 years in jail, of which he was up for parole after 2 years. And when he gets out, he doesn't have to register as a sex offender. Now, keep in mind, Johnathan pled guilty to the charges that were presented in his case. Mm-hmm. So he pleads guilty, only gets 4 years, and does not have to register as a sex offender, as compared to the situation Greg found himself in. And Greg actually brought that up about how does the system work like this? He presented, the two situations, him and Jonathan's, and it was pretty eye-opening when he broke it down.
Yeah, and Sean Dick, and they just wanted to get a prosecution with him, and they were able to get that. I know everybody was hoping for more probably, but to see him serve a little time and get a little bit of justice was nice. But something tells me he won't be out of the news, Mike, before his.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is just one of the. It seems like the litany of issues that he's going to face from a legal perspective. When that plays out, who knows? But it seemed like the victim, that Harley, was okay with the end result. Mm-hmm. And I think in these situations that carries a lot of weight, probably with the DA also. She just wanted it so that when people Google him for the rest of his life, they're going to know what he is and who he is.
Right.
And that was a unique perspective. I had never heard that from a victim before, but the more you think about it in today's world, he's going to be branded as that forever.
Yeah, the DA pointed that out too, and I thought that was a good point. We don't think of it like that, but yeah, I mean, that's it. And I mean, you search his name, and you're going to find all these accusations and everything he's been tied into throughout his life. So that's Johnathan. By the way, if there was any confusion on who is who, Greg or Johnathan, there's not anymore, Mike. Let's just say that. Seeing him in the courtroom.
Yeah, and I've mentioned this before on this podcast. I'm probably the last one who should throw stones. I don't exactly look like a young John Stamos, but this kid has fell off a cliff. If you look at that side-by-side picture they always show from 2013 of Johnathan and Greg, and look at Johnathan now, that guy looks like, I mean, he's like, what, 23, 24 years old? And he does not look that young now, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, he's actually younger.
He looks a lot different. They showed him in his prison jumpsuit in the courtroom, and man, oof.
Yeah, oof's right. So let's put Johnathan behind us. Moved on to Patricia Cummings. We got the tease at the end of episode 4 of Patricia, wondering how she would play into this. Well, she does come back into this, and we get a little more background on her and her kind of defending herself. So she was first a part of this, Innocence Project in Texas, Mike, where they were trying to make it so that when a person like Greg, who'd already been found guilty, was going back through and trying to appeal that case, when they had the attorney, the DA, the local judge, everybody saying he's innocent, that's all they needed to get out, right? Instead of going to the Criminal Court of Appeals or the Court of Criminal Appeals in Texas, where that opinion doesn't really matter. They make up their own choice there. Like, let's leave it. Let's keep it off their plate. Keep it local. If everybody agrees that's the outcome, then that's what we're going to go with, which is obviously very ironic, considering she's spending all this time now trying to do the opposite with Greg as he's trying to fight this. And everybody locally has said he's innocent, but she continues to try to fight this and talk about the things Greg didn't do during the case to make her look better as a lawyer.
Yeah, so when she's speaking to the Texas State Senate on behalf of the Innocence Project, this is in April of 2017, literally 4 months before Greg's writ hearing, which was in August, I believe. So literally 4 months before, on behalf of the Texas Innocence Project. The Innocence Project is a very well-known group, and their focus is on wrongful convictions and proving them. essentially. But in this case, yeah, I mean, you put it perfectly. You know, now 4 months later, she's trying to really do the opposite of what she talked about to the Texas State Senate in April. And she has the support of a guy named Gary Udishin, who works for the Texas Innocence Project and later became Patricia Cummings' lawyer at the writ hearing, and also the state prosecuting attorney, Stacey Sewell, who the state prosecuting attorney basically goes in front of the Court of Criminal Appeals, the way they described it, and gives the Court of Criminal Appeals, the state's version on why the conviction should be upheld. So you have all these people 4 months earlier seeming like they'd be on the side of someone like Greg. And then 4 months later, in order to save Patricia Cummings's, reputation, they're willing to go scorched earth and throw Greg right under the bus. I mean, this makes Patricia Cummings look even worse because it's like, hey, you did a bad job representing your client. There was a lot of holes poked in your case by Keith Hampton and others. And now, instead of just owning it and saying you screwed up, you're just willing to go scorched earth and throw anyone under the bus you have to save your own ass. And it's deplorable, really.
Yeah, and we come to find out now she's with the integrity unit in Philadelphia, which is it's all very funny stepping back and looking at that trajectory and kind of where she is compared to how she treated this case. And I'm sure there'll be some fallout for her, like there will be for a lot of people on this show, from the way they behaved and the way they did their job during Greg's trial to where they are now. I'm sure there's gonna be a lot of people asking questions to them, so they'll get that later in life, and so that's fine. But I went and read some of this amicus brief. I'm going to put it on our website, part of the show notes. If you do want to read this is what she put together with David Botsford and Gary Udashin, or however you said that. So there are a few details in there. She obviously defends her stance and her defense of Greg Kelley. And she basically said, Mike, that was the strongest defense she felt she had looking through it. Now, obviously we disagree now looking through all this, especially with, she made the argument on the relationship between Greg and Johnathan and how they look very similar. She talked about how any kid would have been able to determine the difference between a 6'2" guy like Greg and Johnathan, who I think was 5'4", is what she said in this brief. So that was her big position on the resemblance issue of this whole thing, which I think might be fine, but she does defend it by saying the second boy knew the difference between Greg and Johnathan, which again, I think anybody that's still pointing to the second outcry, it still bothers me because it's not an outcry, right? I mean, I don't know why we're still pointing to that. We've heard it in multiple instances, and we hear it I read it in this amicus brief, but she says that boy's able to identify the difference. So if he can identify the difference, how's the jury ever going to believe that? But there was just so much more to the Johnathan part with the SpongeBob pajamas, which she didn't have a lot of time to process and figure out how to use. But there was just a lot of stuff there, but that was part of this amicus brief that I found.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, she's saying that's the most effective defense that she could have put together. And it's like, hey, Patricia, how many people have to tell you that it wasn't the best defense you could have put together before maybe you say I screwed up? That's what I keep on coming back to. It's like, hey, look, I think all of us in our professional lives, granted, our professional lives probably don't have as much at stake as what hers does when she's defending a defendant like Greg with those charges against him. But it's like, at what point do you own what you did? That, hey, you screwed up, either weren't prepared or whatever the situation was. And now we're going to go through we're going to put together this amicus brief. We're going to try to hold up the writ hearing, all to just save her when, I don't know. She comes out as one of the biggest goats to me in this whole documentary.
Yeah. But she's got a lot of information in there, including who I think she references who the third suspect is in that. So if you're curious who that might be, you can go and read that. And she talks about a third person. I assume the way it reads that's who the third suspect would have been in this case. She talks about that as well. But I mean, ultimately, I don't think it's there's a few things in there I'm like, okay, I kind of see her perspective. But overall, and there's about 97 pages long. I probably read almost half of it. But she kind of comes off, the arguments still seem a little bit flimsy. And I think now, because again, this happened, this was written up and created and sent in, 3 years ago. So now that we've seen this whole documentary put together, maybe she would have positioned it differently, maybe would have read differently. But I think it just looks flimsy based on what we've seen so far. So,
yeah, and Ben, I think it's important. Like sometimes when we're talking about all this little legal stuff, it's I know for me sometimes it's tough to drill down on exactly what's going on and maybe take me to watch the documentary a couple of times, like certain scenes. But essentially what you have here with this amicus brief, again, which is maddening to me, is Greg's attorney, Patricia Cummings, working directly with the state prosecuting attorney on a document meant to bring down Greg and his credibility in the eyes of that Court of Criminal Appeals. Now, thank God they saw through it and were able to rule the way they did. But it's amazing the lengths she went through to try to make herself look good.
The other note too, Mike, I thought you might be interested in the waiver of appeal. Remember that when she told
Yes.
Greg right away? She does say that there was a trial, a case about 4 months prior to Greg's original trial where this was determined. If you waive your appeal, doesn't mean that if there's more information that comes out, you can't get a new trial. So
okay.
That was her whole stance. And I think she talked to Keith about this because she consulted with Keith Hampton before this first trial ended and brought him some information because she said he would be the one that took over that case if there was a new trial. But her whole idea was, I don't think the state is going to know or be aware of that case law that just happened as much as she does. So if I present this option of, hey, we'll take the shortest sentence possible, waive our appeal, we'll kind of get a little leg up on the state potentially, or maybe they weren't thinking about the fact that he still could get a new case down the road. Now, I don't know if she ever thought that would happen. She thinks that Greg was the only clear suspect here. That's what she talks about. There's, not a whole lot else there, but that was her defense. So kind of just to give you a little perspective that she didn't just throw him under the bus completely. She had some sense of what she was doing there.
That's good perspective. And again, that's what we're trying to do here is give you guys as much information as possible. And, in a situation where maybe Patricia Cummings, the one thing she didn't screw up, we definitely want to let you know about that. So that's good perspective, Ben.
Again, that amicus brief will be in the show notes, so check them out on distantreplaypodcast.com. All right, next up, Mike, on our to-do list for our finale here, let's talk a little bit about kind of the fallout from all this, because this after Greg gets out, we kind of learn about where a lot of these key players have gone throughout this. So let's kind of run down the list. I mentioned Patricia Cummings is in Philadelphia. She's speaking. She's part of this integrity unit. So we've gone through her. How about the police department, Mike? You found out pretty interestingly. We learned on the documentary that Mannix retired basically, at the beginning of this year, essentially. But Daly, who was still working at the time, that's no longer the case.
Yeah, Daly was literally working for the Cedar Park Police Department still as of like early July. The first episode of this documentary, I believe, came out on or around like July 5th. And he was basically asked to step down or fired like the day after the documentary was released. And I believe he was asked to do so by the current mayor in Cedar Park and also one of the city council members. I think it was one of those things where, the powers that be in Cedar Park saw the documentary and were like, wow, we can't have this guy working in our police department now that everyone knows. You know what I mean? This is not just insulated now to Williamson County people knowing, we look like a joke if we keep this guy on the force. So, but literally Chris Daly, this happened in 2013 and up until literally less than a month ago, he was still employed by the Cedar Park Police.
It's a shame. It makes you wonder, did they not think that, maybe they didn't know the documentary was happening. Maybe they just thought they were cameras that were, following the case or whatever, news camera, media cameras. But don't you think that something's going to come out? And this is why I'm I go back and forth on technology we have these days and the ability to document everything. It's got its good, it's got its bad. But in this case, it's obviously did its job because, this guy would still be working if not for this documentary coming out. We even saw Greg stand up there 2 days after he got out on bond to try to tell the city council to review this police department and take action. And what did they do? They reviewed everything but Greg's case to see how the police department handled things, right? Basically sidestepped everything, did not have to face any accountability during that. So now fast forward 3 or 4 years later, everything's out there. Now you look completely stupid. I don't know if these are the same city council members or not. Doesn't really matter. Just the fact that that's how that city handled everything in the moment. And now they have to go back and try to act like we got egg on our face. we have to part ways now at this point, only because you were caught. Do you now feel like you feel bad about it, or you want to take action? I mean, it's just, I hate the way that happens, but I'm glad that this documentary shined the light on that so that this outcome did happen.
Yeah, this documentary is what got through to them, right? Because they knew they were going to be embarrassed on a national scale. Now, another good part of this documentary was when Greg's mother spoke at the city council meeting a couple days after he was exonerated, I think a week or so after he was exonerated, saying, breaking down basically how, in a very, very emotional way and a powerful way, to be honest, how the lack of investigation and the lack of professionalism by the Cedar Park Police Department and what it led to for his son, what it led to for her, and what it led to for her now deceased husband, who died not knowing if Greg was exonerated or not, like 5 months before the announcement was made. And she demanded action, and they still didn't do anything after that. So it was really only the fact that they were going to be embarrassed on a national scale that made them do it. Very disingenuous, but I don't think they're unique in how they operate in situations like this.
True. That's fair too. I think that's sad to think about, but I think you're right on that. Who else fallout wise, Mike? We see Johnathan. He's just got out, as we mentioned. Greg's gotten married since. You know what is crazy too? I feel so bad for Greg. I mean, he gets out, right? Last November, he gets the end of sentence. He gets exonerated. Now he gets married in January, and now in March, quarantine hits. I mean, I feel so bad for this dude now. In retrospect, the timing is just so bad.
Exactly. Who knows if there's even going to be? They mentioned that he's enrolled at Texas and he wants to be a walk-on in 2020. We don't. I mean, I hope we have a college football season, but it's not a guarantee right now. And it's not funny, but he's waited 7 years for this, and he's going through this now. That's a very good point.
You have to laugh just because of how life just deals you a hand like that,
I know. And yeah, that's a great point. I didn't think of that. And going through some of the other fallout here, Jana Duty, unfortunately, committed suicide.
Yeah, I was not ready for that. When they said she had, she declined an interview request, I was like, of course she has, and then I was about to make some kind of, smart comment. And then that second screen that went up on there, and I was like, oh man, I did not see that coming.
Yeah, it was sobering. One of the other assistant DAs that originally prosecuted Greg, that's Sunday Austin. She's like a attorney somewhere in Texas. But the big news, one of the biggest things to me was that one of the other assistant district attorneys, that Joffrey Puryear, right? Now, if you remember his specific role in this, he's the one who green-lighted the second kid charges against Greg, right?
Right.
So if you look at this a certain way, you could essentially say this assistant district attorney framed Greg, right? Pretty much framed Greg. And then now present day, he was appointed as a judge by the governor. And in like the worst timing of all time, his ceremony to be appointed as a judge was literally the day after Greg was exonerated.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So the optics of that are absolutely terrible.
His term, just reading some, going back through some old tweets from that time, and looks like his term set to expire December 31st, 2020. So we'll see what the future holds for him. But again, I think he's another one now when this documentary comes out. There's going to be a lot of people asking questions and questioning themselves and elevating him to that position now. I mean, I think this is one of the ones that you had to really scratch your head on. Like, how did he get to this point when, anybody that followed this case, you're aware of what happened. And the final decision hadn't come out yet when they had made this decision. I'm sure, was it one day after or whatever, but him getting to that point had already been put in place. The wheels were already in motion for him to become a judge. So everybody knew, and you would think that you'd wait until this final ruling came down before you made any decision in relation to people involved with that case, right? But not
yeah,
yet.
you know what? He did like subtle, really shady things that Keith Hampton, who we'll get to in a second, actually pointed out very well. This guy Puryear, first of all, he brought the charges by the second kid up when he knew how the cooperation from the second kid was obtained by Daly. And he also knew about the SpongeBob pajama pants, knew that he had to disclose that to the defense attorney, but did it at the last possible second. So the defense attorney, Patricia Cummings, couldn't even process that info and fully explore it and discover how relevant it was to Greg's defense. So just little things he did were kind of no, we're kind of shady. And who knows if he did them at the direction of Janet Duty? Who knows? But still, he's the name attached to those two issues. And that to me is just very underhanded and probably not someone you want as a judge.
Yeah, and I wonder how much she had to do with that gym owner, which we don't know anything else about. But
what happened to that guy? I thought we were going to see him again. And we never did. I know you read the amicus brief on the third suspect, but we never got any more clarification on that either.
No, and the reason I asked that too is because I was looking through some old tweets and came across one from that trial when Joffrey said during that trial, Greg was known at his gym as Greg the Marine Sniper. So I wonder, like, if that was his big thing, was to push that gym owner too. Like, it's almost like he's working with that police department to come out with ideas on ways to prosecute Greg. I don't know, but yeah, he doesn't come out too well. But yeah, let's talk about some people or some questions that kind of went unanswered for us. The gym owner, surprised he never got reeled back in some way. I guess he truly was just one witness or one prosecution witness that was there to damage credibility, and that was it. Although it didn't seem that big of a deal what he presented. Texas Ranger, you said you hoped we hadn't reached the end of the arc for the Texas Ranger, Cody Mitchell, but nothing really came from him either.
No report. He never submitted a final report on what his findings were in his big, large-scale investigation where he needed to, question everyone. Hopefully someone that's either his boss or someone asked him, hey, what happened with this? Also, I had a question with, we didn't hear all, not that you expect to, from Shama McCarty. I couldn't find anything on her anywhere. If she's ever even spoken about this publicly ever.
I think I texted you when I was doing some research, right? Where she actually took the stand in this case.
Yes. Yep.
And now again, I was curious this too, because I thought she maybe had passed away is why she is nowhere to be found over the course of this entire documentary. But she actually testified in the case, the original trial. And during that original trial, she said, based on old stories that are from local news outlets there around Cedar Park and Austin, that she thought Greg was innocent. She didn't think Greg did this to the children, which I thought was what really blew my mind, that she was kind of defending Greg here. And I didn't get any more. There's not really much more on what she said on her testimony. She did talk about how she used to leave and run errands and stuff and would just leave people there with the children, and said things like she didn't know where they slept, which rooms they slept in all the time, or how often they interacted with Greg Kelley. Just everything was real shady surrounding that family. And it's hard for me to believe a whole lot of what they said. I just don't think, best case scenario, she was not doing her job at all. And she ran a very suspect daycare and was not protecting the children. I mean, we know that for a fact. That's best case. Worst case is, she put these kids kind of willingly and knowingly put these children into these positions to have this happen. So yeah, I'm curious what happened with her as well.
Yeah. And those are about all the questions that I had. Did you have any more that kind of came to mind, or?
Well, the biggest thing I think for me is, like, when you look back on this, and again, the sad thing is that we don't know what happened. Right. We don't truly know what happened with the child right now. And that's kind of where we are. And Greg points that out. Greg says a few things about this during the documentary, but I'm just trying to figure out exactly what happened. I mean, do you think this was truly a case of mistaken identity, where just Greg was in the wrong place at the wrong time? And I mean, in fact, in terms of, his family getting sick to where he had to go to this house, right? One of the boys that lived in this house looked just like him. The daycare owner not taking care of these children very well, to where he happened to kind of be there at times when maybe she wasn't. Not that there was any ill will there, but he just happened to be there. So do you think it's just a whole case of, I don't want to say mistaken identity, but just wrong place, wrong time? Or do you think it is possible that if Johnathan McCarty, who is still, I think, the prime suspect in many people's minds, if he was the one that, let's say, did this, do you think it was a malicious intent by him to set up Greg along the way? Like, I'm trying to figure out exactly how this played out.
That's a good question about him setting up Greg. We know he didn't obviously offer any information to try to save Greg or help him out. I think it was a situation where I think something definitely did happen. Obviously, I err on the side that Greg was not the one who did it. And if it wasn't Johnathan, I mean, who are the other people living in that house? You have 3 more of Shama's kids who were criminals, right? So you would probably say that Greg, maybe one of his siblings. And I don't know if it was an active setup kind of situation from Johnathan, but whatever it was, I think, looking back on it, and I don't blame the mother, Greg's mother, at all before I preface this, but, she left her kid with Shama McCarty, all of her criminal sons, and Johnathan. And I think now remember, during this time, the reason why I don't blame her, she had brain cancer, and her husband was in the hospital with a stroke. But had she been of, more sound mind and not in a rush to get him and living somewhere, she probably would have looked a little more into who she was actually leaving him with. I think as soon as Greg went in that house, he was at a risk that I don't think anyone knew he was. And unfortunately, I think between that, the botched police investigation, the lack of DA investigation, it was a house of cards that broke the wrong way for Greg at every turn. And he ended up in the situation he ended up in, which was very unfortunate.
Yeah, that's really the only question I have is what happened here and how did this all play out to Greg? I mean, was it just somebody trying to get him specifically charged with this, or did he just happen to be there and fall into the wrong place at the wrong time? I don't know, but it's sad either way that it played out. I'm just glad that him having not done this is able to get out and at least live part of his life, even though he lost a good chunk of it. And and like you mentioned, you touched on this briefly. He did get a walk-on tryout with Texas, so we'll see. Maybe he does make the team this year. Very curious to see how that plays out. But he's already done two things: got exonerated and got enrolled into school. So he's almost to that point. So hopefully he gets that opportunity, because as I mentioned last episode, would be a hell of a story to follow him and kind of see how that progresses for his career. And he's deserved that opportunity for sure. But that's all I have, Mike. I mean, winners and losers from this documentary. Who you got?
The two biggest winners I have are Keith Hampton and Sean Dick, besides Greg, who was obviously exonerated, but other people. Look, Keith Hampton, his press conference after Greg was exonerated, those emotions he had when speaking about Greg were 100% genuine. And just the way that he carried himself throughout this whole documentary, the genuine concern he had that this, the local judge's ruling was going to be overturned by the Court of Criminal Appeals. He came off so genuine, so knowledgeable, and so in control of the situation. I have to think that he's going to have a bump like that Kathleen Zellner, the Stephen Avery attorney, had from Making a Murderer. If you think you were wrongly convicted, or you have to have a case go to the Court of Criminal Appeals, in Texas, how could you not hire Keith Hampton right now? Secondly, Sean Dick. So remember, this case started with a bad police investigation and incompetence at best, outright framing Greg at worst from the district attorney, right? It should have never even got past that point. And Sean Dick realized that the people who were in office before him might have made a mistake. He went into things with an open mind and led us down the road to Greg getting exonerated. And I think he deserves a lot of credit, because we mentioned this at the beginning of this. I listen to a lot of true crime podcasts, and a lot of people that end up being wrongfully convicted, it usually ends up being as a result of an overzealous district attorney who's not willing to give an inch. And I give him credit for sort of standing apart from the pack in that respect. And Keith Hampton did a good job also of pointing out how much Sean Dick should be commended for how he handled this whole situation. So those two were the big winners for me.
Yeah, and I'll even add, go back even further with Williamson County. This was coming off the Michael Morton exoneration too, who had been wrongfully convicted of murdering his wife, and he had just gotten out months before this case played out originally with Greg from the previous DA before Janet Duty. So there'd been a long line of this mishandling by the DAs, and Sean Dick, again, much like Keith Hampton, seemed level-headed, in control, truly looking for the truth in these cases and being as fair as possible along the way, and didn't seem to make up his mind either way, right? For or against anybody. And he kind of went back and forth. And I think truly that's kind of how you have to operate, is you have to take both sides. You can't lock into one answer that you think, or one outcome that you think is correct, and try to prove that. He took it from both angles, welcomed all information, and helped move this case forward. So yeah, I think those two guys are clearly the two big winners here. I think the biggest losers, I think we've kind of already touched on. I don't think there's anybody really left to add, but Daly, he's the true loser here because he lost his job. I mean, we'll see how the fallout goes over the course of the next year for everybody else, but he's the one that truly is not in a position he was before. Mannix, I mean, obviously doesn't look great. Not as bad as Daly, because Daly is the one who botched the investigation. And then Patricia Cummings and Joffrey Puryear. I think it's clear who the GOATs are in this documentary.
And a sneaky underrated loser in this is the original jury for how that deliberation went down.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, true. I know I always hit on that, but that to me was a huge part of this.
I agree. Well, overall, great documentary. Glad we watched it. I thought that things were going to go differently. I'm glad that it turned out the way it did. And I'm glad that there were cameras here through this entire thing to catch it, which is also, pretty crazy. I wonder how many more things we're going to see like this over the years, Mike, now that we got so much technology, so much access, that I feel like content like this is going to be continuing to be created through the years, like stuff that's happening right now, 10 years from now, being able to go back and look at those things as well. So this was great. We'll have to add another one on our list sometime soon. If you have any suggestions, send them in. We'd love to hear either sports documentaries or any games that you have in mind. We'll get back to some games here following this episode. Go back and watch some old games, as now sports are starting to start back up around the country, and we're energized for live sports, but we still enjoy going back and watching the old games. Anything else to add, Mike?
No, I thoroughly enjoyed this documentary. Looking forward to moving forward here, recapping some more historical games, moments, and documentaries. So like Ben said, keep those suggestions coming.
Again, you can find everything on distantreplaypodcast.com. Find us on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and please hit subscribe and leave us a review. We would love that as well. A 5-star review would be delightful if you could make that happen. So for Mike Noto, I'm Ben George. Thanks for listening to the Distant Replay Podcast. We are all glad that Greg has been exonerated. We'll talk to you on the next episode.